Hello and welcome to this month's masterclass. I am founder and CEO of Powered to Rise, Rafat Fields. We are going to walk through some information regarding the 2025 as we turn into 2026 legislative landscape and give you some tools and resources so that you can start thinking about how to build your roadmap for the journey ahead. I live in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And one of the things that I have come to appreciate about being grounded here is that there is a lot of legacy from Indigenous populations. So the first inhabitants of these lands are Native American population. They have a lot of rich culture and traditions. When I go to meetings, I've had the privilege of experiencing the land acknowledgement. That means honoring the people who inhabited the places and spaces that you walk today long before you ever arrived inside these rooms. When I think about what that means globally as well as locally, it really speaks to my heart. And so, wherever you are, I want to invite you into the experience of holding space for your ancestors. And I like to think of this as ancestors of all walks and forms of life. Whoever speaks to your journey and your presence and how you show up today, I want to offer you a window to hold a moment of gratitude, of acknowledgement, and welcoming them into your spirit as you prepare to do the important work ahead. On the screen are just a few of mine. I'm coming to you having just returned from a trip to Oakland where I got to walk through some history in the local area of California. Is specifically Cesar Chavez. And one of the things that I got to experience was seeing his photo alongside some of the Black civil rights leaders in that area. And it just reminded me how interconnected our journey and our stories are. So when it comes to the Native population, there's so many different tribes. I don't want to call presence to one specific one now. I'm being very intentional because I want to learn more about the rich tapestry and history of all of the stories that come together in this area. I will say for being planted in this space today and for the work ahead of us as we go into mapping out our 2026 advocacy plans, I hold room for all of the global cultures that have come before us and for those that we will be working together with arm in arm to build a better tomorrow. As we get started, I want to be very clear about the purpose that lives within my heart, why I decided to invest in making these resources available, and what I hope to accomplish. I think of policy as storytelling in motion, but on a timeline, meaning that what we experience in our day to day lives today, they impact us and they start taking shape in conversations that we share with others. And as those stories get told and retold and passed between one person to the next, you start to pick up a collective through line, a movement, a tapestry that weaves together. And when those stories reach the ears of those who actually make voting decisions on what bills, legislation, budget allocation, et cetera, will be granted both at the national, federal, and state and local levels. That's what I mean. There's a very strong connection between storytelling narratives and policy. That window in space may stretch weeks, months, or even years in many cases. So, if we understand that, we know that the words that every single person uses to express how we are interacting in the world, how we are feeling and are thinking about the future is really important. And I want to empower more people to have the tools to understand what are the levers that policy gets made through and to help you find your way, whatever mechanism feels most aligned with who you are and how you communicate. I want you to have more agency, feel like you have more say in shaping those policies. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this. I want you to understand that there's some nuances as we go into 26 that are going to be different than what unfolded in 2025. And I want to take you through my thinking and help you start thinking through your own construct of what that means for you next year. As I share this, we're turning the corner to Thanksgiving. So we are approaching the end of November for the 119th congressional cycle. What that really means is we're on a fast track to the end of this particular session. What I am encouraging myself to do and what I would share with others is we now understand what is possible between now and the end of session, and we get to make decisions on where we deploy our energy, whether it's fighting for things for the remainder of 2025 or doing what we can to prepare for the battles ahead that are waiting for us in 2026. Now, I personally subscribe to the I'm thinking about where my energy is best placed for 26 sessions and how I can start slowly but surely arranging what I need to be successful in getting my voice to those tables. And so, if you are aligned with that thinking, you're going to find that this is going to be some valuable information. When you get access to this presentation, there are going to be some resources that you'll get to click into. What I want you to know is that the federal congressional cycle generally tends to follow a cadence. There may be a deviation of a couple of days, a couple of weeks, but for the most part, it's a pretty reliable cycle. Now, I say this after a shutdown, which would definitely be the exception. But on the state level, the state sessions, a lot of those are already published. And you're going to see that because of where we're ending in 25, there is going to be a lot of focus on what's happening at that state level. So next year, while we're still going to be focused on what's happening in Congress, we are also going to be looking at what is moving through individual states and how can we be good partners, because to get the outcomes that we want in 26, it is going to require far more of a coordinated effort than what transpired in 25, because it's a different type of legislative cycle ahead of us. We know that the shutdown did have some negative consequence on terms of the economy, but more importantly, it has some impact on the pipeline of pushing legislation through. And so there are going to be things that may have had an opportunity to go up for floor debate, discussion, or vote that are no longer going to be on that hot priority list. As we prepare to wrap up the end of the 25 federal cycle, you have this trifecta that is right around the corner. One being, you got to start thinking about what didn't get through at the federal level in 25. When you think about the priorities list for 26 at the federal layer, it's going to be important to see what starts getting filed early and who the sponsors and co-sponsors and alliances are around some of those things. As we talk more about what to expect on the cycle of 26, this is going to be even more important. Separate from the conversation of what we think will be filed early in 26 is what is going to happen at the state level as a result of the HR1 package. What we understand is the quote unquote one big beautiful bill is a very complex set of legislation that impacts many sectors. It's actually not just healthcare. There are many things interconnected and interwoven into it. It's important to understand where we are as a result of the shutdown. Even though the government has reopened, it has affected the trajectory of what is possible for the remainder of session. And it will also play a role in what you can expect to happen early in 26. Based on where we are today, you can anticipate that many of the legislative conversations that are going to be taking place in Congress right now are going to be around appropriations or budget negotiations. We also know that we're going to be getting into this period of, because 26 is a election cycle, you're going to see a slowdown in some of those bigger conversations in preparation for bigger campaign strategies in 26. I personally believe that what this means is that as we come to a close on the 25 congressional cycle, those agendas are pretty well defined. Although the government is technically back open, there's some runway and ramp up in restoring operational capacity. More importantly, I think what we should all be thinking about is where is our time best focused as we head into the start of 2026. And I think that has a lot to do with what's happening at the state level. Because of the massive legislative package that came through HR 1, you're going to see a lot of the rulemaking processes are kicking over to the states in 26. And because of that, it is important to start getting our heads around when our sessions, because they are different by state. Some states only convene every 2 years. So that's going to be fun. And then there'll be others that might have to pick up some special sessions to accommodate all of the things that have to happen across all of the states and territories to pull through the implementation of that massive package. And keeping in mind, it's not just healthcare. There are many different sectors that are going to be affected by HR 1. And so now the states have to figure out how to source standing up that operational infrastructure, but also becoming compliant with those laws by the dates indicated in the legislative package. So there's a lot of work, all hands on deck in every single state legislative session next year. There's an opportunity for us all to understand when the pre-filing deadlines are. And in some places, you can already start to see where conversations are happening around what bills will be put up, who's partnering, co-sponsoring. But the thing that I want to drive home here is because there is a lot that has to be figured out by the states next year on how to pull through what has already been laid down in HR 1. If you have an issue that you want to see legislation go forward on that is not related to the pull through of this massive load of policy that has to be implemented, it is going to be challenging, right? Because they're on a timeline, they're on a deadline to get those things done. So, this is where having awareness of what are the issues that matter to you and how is it connected to the directives that they've been given by Congress, and how can you find your partners and your co-conspirators in doing this work on the ground. That's why we want to get a head start and start thinking about how we want to weave those discussions together. Let's chat it up a little bit about what's ahead of us in 26, because I want to be fully transparent. I'm doing work, and the center theme of my focus is not politics, right? So I know that at some point in my educational journey, I have learned all this information, but it's not something that I study or keep a hold of every time I pick up a newspaper, which is rare these days. But it's not the thing that sits top of mind. And that's why I think, as surprising as it was for me, I want to make sure that we're having this conversation because I want us to be having these discussions at kitchen tables all across the country. I want us to think about next year, all of our congressional representatives are going to be up for reelection. All of them at the same time. And so those are 2-year appointments. Those appointments are for 2 years, and we get to have a ballot check in that allows us, the people within those congressional districts, to have a say in who's leading the conversations to represent us during these sessions where votes are taking place. Now, this year, we've seen what happens when there's a supermajority in Congress. And so now, based on everything that has transpired, we get to have a new conversation in November of next year and decide who is going to go back the following year. So this is going to shape a lot of the conversation that happens at the federal level. But because so much of this work is going to be implemented at the state level, the pain points that are going to be experienced as a result of those decisions that happen in 25 are going to be circulating as we prepare to go into that November election cycle. So it's important to have awareness of that. There are also 36 governorships up for reelection in 26. Now, that is mind boggling to me because that governor seat is very influential. I was doing some legwork and just looking at major legislation changes and events within the country and how that played out in election results and timelines after those events. And what I can say from my very new to this eyes, I want you to know I am not a lobbyist or deep policy expert. I'm someone from the community who deeply cares. And I just want us all to have the information so we can make informed decisions. I see a connection between what's happening on the ground and the turnover of election cycles. So I think between House of Representatives and the governorship, there's going to be an opportunity to change a lot of momentum, even if it's only a part of the overall majority profile in Congress. It's an important step. It gives insight into how sentiments are moving through the American population. And that's going to be super important as we go into the presidential cycle 2 years after that. And so I hope that what you take away from this is it's not a presidential election in 26, but it is an important opportunity to course correct and or shift the dialogue in new directions. With this, the type of legislation that you can expect to go up, I think is going to be very different. Again, you're going to have at that state level the legislators and the regulators who have to build out the marching orders to execute what was voted upon through HR 1. And I think that there's going to be a lot of hot debate on how that gets done because in many states, on the ground, the sentiment for what's happening in that geography experienced by the pain points of the people may no longer align with the voting outcome that was expressed when HR 1 passed. And so I think you're going to see a lot of bills that come out in the 26 cycle that are designed to really go to the heart of an election cycle or a pre-seed for an election cycle. So think about things that really force you into a place of taking a stand. We're going to have to work really hard to find our bipartisan issues in 26. I believe that they exist. But I think that because of the nature of the year where the elections are on the line, there'll be a gravitation towards some of the more polarized versions of the storytelling. And so, depending on what your issue is and how you want to approach advocacy, it's important to be aware of that dynamic in the landscape of 26. One of the biggest areas of debate leading up to the shutdown was around the expiration of tax subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. They are set to expire December 31st, and the negotiation to restore the government from the shutdown did not address the expiration of these tax credits. This gets right to the heart of my belief that as we look at the last few weeks of 2025, it's important to start coming closer to the local area to understand what are the conversations that are being had by constituents. What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? Because the words that people are using to express their daily experiences right now, in my opinion, are the best way to understand where conversations around policy are headed in the early part of 26, but definitely as we get closer to that midterm election cycle that is going to come in November. Because strain on economics and affordability, the price of groceries, the price of gas, the ability to access things like SNAP food benefits are going to be hot topics for the months to come. Because even with the negotiations that have come through to get that budget package passed and to reopen the government, Again, some of this has to be administered at the state level. Many of these programs are federal state partnerships. There'll be guardrails that every state has to adhere to, but there's also going to be some variability in how this gets applied state by state. And to really bring this to life, I want you to imagine that you're building a tall skyscraper or even a cozy home. Both scenarios work. If you can think of the federal package that passed this session, HR 1, that came through over the 4th of July holiday, I want you to consider it as pouring the foundation, putting some outer walls and a roof overhead. So you have a structure, you have a legislative package that provides structure. And within it, it gives some specifics, and I'm putting specifics in air quotes here, on what has to be done. So, in the world of public health care, for example, Medicaid, there are things like work requirements that are now in place. But the specifics on exactly how to apply those guardrails are not defined. We have to go into a process known as rulemaking that will be done state by state. And in that rulemaking process, you're now going from steel beams and an outer overhead fixture to secure the building to you're pouring plaster, drywall, you're installing countertops, you're hanging window treatments. So, do you have pull down blinds? Do you have curtains? Do you have wallpaper or flat paint? So, all of these speak to the experience of living in that house, right? So, the federal package just gives you the container of what needs to be done. But at the end of all of the implementation cycles, which are really driven by the state, how you feel about being within that structure is going to come down to how those implementation protocols are applied. And that's why the state level in 2026 is going to be so important. It's going to directly affect how people experience these programs that are under directive from the federal legislation to implement these policy changes. The values and the culture of that state legislative body will also play a significant role in how those implementation processes are rolled out. So, in places where you have that greater misalignment between the outcome of the vote and what people are experiencing on the ground, if those values and experiences are not close together, you can imagine that as you go into next year's midterm reelections, there's going to be a very robust discussion around what is the best pathway forward. And that is what I want to prepare all of us for. I want you to be able to speak with clarity the issues that matter most to you and have firm understanding of the ecosystem that you're presently in and how you can expect it to evolve on your journey ahead. I want you to imagine forward what's coming in 2026. This slide is a little bit of a policy forward type of statement. So, right now, the legislation has passed at the federal level, but there is a window, there's a period of time in between when the state has to figure out how to apply the directives within that package. And so, what this means is Medicaid redeterminations, that is something that we saw that paused during the COVID era, but that is going to kick back into gear. There's a federal mandate now that requires that recertification process. And then those job requirements. Now, you saw that move through some states, but now all states and territories are going to need to apply those rigorous standards for work requirements. The challenge is how. So there are systems and protocols that some states are applying. But now we have to figure out how to make that work across all 50 states. And does it have to be every single state individually building its own infrastructure? I think that organizations like the National Association of Medicaid Directors does a phenomenal job of building collaboration. And as someone who works inside of technology, I know for sure that there's some possibilities around how to build a more centralized data infrastructure that could be supportive of all the states, but also compartmentalized that allows that data validation to happen within each individual state program. But it does take some deep thought into how to put the right guardrails around the data and bringing the right vendors and partners together. So this is a solvable challenge for sure. I think that the great news about how technology is evolving in this particular day and time is that there are resources and providers who can definitely help these states figure out the better path forward to do this work. But they're on a very tight runway of when these protocols have to be implemented. So getting the right people to the table at the right time is going to be so much of the work. So that goes back to what is the issue that you are experiencing in your area and how closely connected is it to some of this groundwork that they don't have a choice? Like, even if they wanted to punt the ball, they can't. So the states have a timeline by which much of this has to be in place. And so if your issue is outside of this, I would caution you to start thinking about how you're going to get the narrative to support your legislative members moving this up the agenda, because you'll have a tall hill to climb. To make this even more practical, let's talk about what this means for your digital platform and even how you are interacting in the real world, like in your everyday engagements and interactions. There will be new legislation passed next year because there's new legislation passed in every session. But what I want you to think about is, what are your representatives going to be focused on? If you're in the House of Representatives, you're thinking about your constituents and that runway between January and November of when they're going to be going to vote. You're developing a storyline and an understanding of what they need and want, and how to get resources and information to them to help them feel confident that you are the right candidate to continue driving that. So, what are the things that you are speaking about, or what are the stories that you have access to in your day to day? If you can find connection between the platform that you're building and the problems that people in those seats need to solve or convey back to their constituents in terms of, this is the value I've added for you, there's a real opportunity for you to be that bridge builder and connect those dots. I will also say, translating what is going to be a very complex cycle in 26 between understanding what happened in 25 and how it's kicking over to the states this year, while also monitoring for new things that are coming out of the federal layer in 26, is going to be extraordinarily useful. Because if you thought a lot of information came at us in 25, just wait. I believe that in 26, it is going to go even more chaotic in the amount of proliferation of information. So I want us all to be prepared that simplifying, being that soothing and calming presence that helps people focus on where the opportunities that you can have impact within the chaos is going to be such a valuable skill to have moving forward over the next few months. And to do this well, the most important things I can put in your toolkit are trusted and reliable sources. I'll be adding a set of resources on the dashboard that I'll share with you that can at least help point you in the right direction of what publications are really known for sharing fair, balanced, reliable, data driven information that can help you ground either your own understanding or information you pass along with your audience. Early in the year, you can expect things to be moving through those sessions that are going to be the seeding, the groundwork for conversations that will be happening later in the year, especially as you approach the re-election cycle. So if you can imagine that you're going to be talking to constituents, you're going to want to say things like, I was successful in getting X, Y, and Z done for you. So, the early part of the year, you can expect conversations and bills to pass through that are going to be very closely connected to the stories that legislators want to be able to tell during those legislative cycles. This is also important. Like, it's really simple to think of elections in isolation, but they're really not. So imagine you are working at the federal level, you're in the House of Representatives, but HR 1 is kicking over to the states. So it would be important and helpful to know how the conversations are playing out at the state legislature for your state, and to be able to have access to the storytelling that's happening in the community on the ground as a result of the decisions that are being made. Because as you, as the federal candidate, has to go and make your case to the same people living in those states, we need to be able to connect the dots between the reason decisions are being made in your local area is because of the policy that was set at the federal layer. And if you don't like the way this is playing out in your community, we have to have a bridge to be able to go back and say, locally, this is the impact, but federally, we have to shift the way the election outcomes are going to weave together to be able to get the voting in place to turn around some of these bigger pieces of policies. So I used to think of this as like a big circle, like it's a big, yes, everything's is moving to the states and we have to be focused and engaged there, but we also have to consider that if we want to move the federal policy in a different direction, it isn't one or the other, it's a continuum. It's you have to be in the middle and see how all of the aspects in the ecosystem are working together. So early in the year, key focus on what is going to be filed. This is really both at the state and federal level. From the lens of the constituent, it's very personal and it's very local. So, how can we tell stories today that are going to help that constituent make a decision in November about what is supportive or non supportive for improving their lived experience? So, January to March, you can expect a lot of issues going through that are going to help tell that story months later. One of the things I think surprised me as I started becoming more aware of the advocacy and legislative processes is that the state sessions, on average, don't run as long as you would imagine them to. The state legislators are working year round, but those sessions are finite. And because of that, I think that what will happen is some of them are done by, let's say, April, May, June ish, depending on the state and whether or not they go into a special session. As you enter the end of their session, many of the conversations and the debates that led up to what legislation passed through those state houses are going to be really meaningful in terms of message testing for some of the other elections. We talked about the governors and the House of Representatives that are all going to be up towards the end of next year. So if you really pay close attention to what's happening in the state capitals, some of those conversations are going to pop up on the campaign trail for sure. So the question is, as we think about elevating issues in front of our state legislative representatives, how are the conversations going to be reflective of the daily experiences that we're having or the people that we serve are having? Because to the degree that we elevate those conversations, it will also help get those topics elevated at the federal layers later on in the year. In many states, there's this process that works side by side. There is the legislative process of getting the bill passed. But then for those bills that are expected to have a significant fiduciary impact, they may have to go through a separate appropriations scrutiny or have a different lens applied before they can complete the process of becoming fully voted out and signed into law. As you can imagine, right now, affordability, the economy is a very robust conversation of debate. And because people are having very specific experiences around the cost of living, and we're seeing things play out like the budget in Washington because of the shutdown and the economic impact there. These are conversations we can expect are going to carry over into the campaign trail. So, this is where I was saying before, like, polarization of messages compels people to take action. And because both sides are going to be looking to get their base out to vote, I think that you're going to start seeing more starkly contrasted messaging emerge as we get closer and closer to November. As we get to the election, it's important to understand that time in between when the election results are published and when people take office in January of 27 is an important window. It's the reset. Just as we're doing right now in preparation for 26, is to understand where people are going to be sitting, where are the chairs moving around the table, and what are our opportunities to identify areas of partnership. Where do we already have relationships, and who's new? Who's coming in that is perhaps newer in terms of our relationship set? How can we be intentional about building a plan to start bringing them into the fold of the issues that matter most to us? Call this who's who in the zoo, and it's mapping out all the places where there's been movement and change because of the election. There is your full 12-month view of how to map out the journey ahead. And the most important thing right now is to keep your steps small. Really hone in on what are the issues that matter most to you in your personal lived experience, as well as the people who are closest to you. What are the issues that are going to make the biggest difference in moving your story in a more positive direction? Then it's important to understand who trusts your voice on these issues. And it doesn't mean like, are you an expert that is out speaking in the world on topics and you've written studies and research? No, no, no. There's a group of people who, when you talk, they lean in and they listen and they trust you. It could be people who are in your family, it could be people who are in your book club. Even as you are figuring things out for yourself and you're trying to break apart the information, because there's a lot of it out there right now. Some of it is good, some of it is misinformation. So all of us have a lot of work ahead to sort through what's what. So as you are finding your own way, who are the people who trust you, who trust your voice? And it's like each one teach one. I think I grew up with that concept because my mom was a school teacher. But who can you bring along on this journey? And the more we have these kitchen table, like backyard barbecue discussions, I personally think that that's what's going to be the most meaningful for getting to better outcomes in 26. So start thinking about, who do you share your everyday stories with, and how can you help the personal lived experiences by yourself and your neighbors and your family reach the voting table where those policies are being decided and budget resources are being sent down to your neighbors. Hope that what's clear is that while advocacy and policy is extremely local, it is the everyday lived experience of every individual who has the ability to cast a vote, right? There are things that we can do to share resources, to share our stories, to help each other have a more comprehensive view of what's happening at the micro level, like in our household, in our family, and on our block, in our city, and then roll that up to a more national big picture. This dashboard that I have built for us all is going to be a series of federal and state resources to help us start building a collective that exists outside of a single entity, outside of a single organization, but something that we can all use to do this work together. And my mind for building this resource was I want it to be something that is powerful for that individual practitioner, the person that is walking the block in their neighborhood. And I want it to be as powerful for that individual as it is for the large association that is sponsoring legislation that impacts our community, our providers, what have you. And more importantly, I want these resources to connect the work that each of us is doing together, because the person who's walking the block is just as important as the person who's traveling to Washington to sit in those hearing rooms and provide testimony. In fact, you need each other. We all do. We need to find ways to make this process more efficient. I think that everyday people need to have a better understanding of what the political cycles look like, what the legislation process looks like. So you understand that when we're asking for stories, how important these stories really are to changing the outcome. And then if you have an interest in navigating yourself to Washington to be a part of that process, by all means, like there are vehicles to make that happen too. But I also think that the people who represent us in these rooms at these hearings, because they're deeply doing that work and they're working side by side with those who are building and designing the policies, it can be a real challenge to stay closely connected to walking the streets every day. So that person needs the vehicle as much as the person who's doing the work on the ground. This is about creating digital ecosystems that connect us together without bias, without proprietary restrictions, like it's behind a paywall or is under the lens of an organization that is sponsoring a specific set of legislation. There's a group of data that helps us all. And so, what I want to do is create a vehicle that makes the places that we can share insight together more practical, so that as we do that work individually as systems, organizations, and individual practitioners, we can still do that. But we can also have shared tools and resources that support us as well. I'll close with this thought that everything that I've learned around policy over these last couple of years is that it really starts at kitchen tables. It starts at the conversations that are happening between everyday people. The pain points that people are living through today become the policies that get voted out in sessions in Washington and state capitals in the future. So our platforms, the way we use our digital ecosystems, can really play a pivotal role in the outcomes of future votes because we get to shift the conversations that are being elevated today. This QR code will take you directly to that dashboard. HEAL stands for the Health Equity Advocacy League. Now, keep in mind, if you've been with me for a period of time, you know how passionately I believe in the social determinants of health. Just a rundown, I am actually expanding my focus of policy beyond healthcare because I believe AI and technology is actually going to play a pivotal role in a lot of what happens in the healthcare industry because income is one of the most important social determinants of health. And to the degree that we can impact bringing more high wage jobs into communities that have been historically under resourced, the faster we are going to make impact in addressing health outcomes. That is my personal belief. So on this dashboard, it is a work in progress. It is a prototype that will grow and evolve as we get more hands working on it. But take a look around and feel free to send any questions or thoughts you have my way on how we can make this tool even better. To that end, I'd love for you to share if this information has been helpful, inspirational, and encouraging. Or you could say, you know what, there are things that were really missing for me, Rafat? Can you give me some insight into X, Y, and Z? It takes a village. We are going to navigate to better pathways by us working together in partnership. So I look forward to hearing the feedback that you share, and I can't wait to get some of these digital tools into the hands of those who are working in our communities every day and partnering with the decision makers who represent us both at the state and local levels, as well as walking the hallways in Washington. As always, I'm just an email away. If you have any questions, shoot them over. I look forward to being on the journey with you now and well into 26 as we build out better programs for our communities and work side by side to make the realities happen together.